Hi to those that are joining us. This is Greening Your Finances, and we'll get started in just a couple of minutes. Hi, thanks for spending your lunch hour, for some of you, with us. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes. For those of you that are joining us, welcome to our webinar, Greening Your Finances, and we'll give it another 1 minute and get started. Welcome to our webinar. We will get started in just 30 seconds. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to our webinar, Greening Your Finances. My name is Gigi Norcross. I'm Vice President of Business Development for Green Century, and I'll be your moderator today. I am joined by an esteemed panel of experts who will guide us through a discussion about the environmental damage that's caused by fossil fuels and how you can make an impact through your financial choices. I'll introduce the panel in just a minute, but first a few housekeeping notes. I encourage you to set your view mode to speaker so that the emphasis is on the panelist that is speaking. Secondly, the agenda is chock full of content, but we'll leave time for questions at the end. You should pose your questions via the chat, and I encourage you to do that throughout the session. Panelists, as well as other members of our team, may respond to your questions in the chat, and then some of them will save to the end. So you can pose your questions throughout. You don't have to hold on to them until the end of the session. And then finally, this presentation is one that we will make available to registrants and attendees following the session. So feel free to take a lot of notes. Definitely encourage you to do that. But it is also the case that the presentation deck will come to you so that resources and other things that we share over the course of the session, you'll have easy access to after we're done. Okay, so let's move to the next slide so that I can introduce our panelists. So first of all, Tony Dutzik is the Associate Director and Senior Policy Analyst with the Frontier Group. Tony will really play a set the stage kind of role for this webinar, and he'll be discussing the environmental harms that are caused by fossil fuels. As he'll say in his remarks, it doesn't have to be this way, and so we'll pivot from Tony to Kathy and Leslie to focus more on solutions and specifically at how you can make choices with your finances to help better protect the planet. Kathy Becker is the Responsible Finance Campaign Director at Green America, and she will be specifically talking about how to green your banking choices, your credit cards, and your insurance products. And then we'll wrap up the webinar with Leslie Samuelrich, who's the president at Green Century Funds, and she will be talking about how to green your investments. At the end of the webinar, we will share a newly released updated guide to sustainable investing guide, Investing Without Fossil Fuels, which is a co-produced guide between Green Century and Green America. So at the end of the webinar, we'll share that guide as well as ways for you to gain access to it. So that's what we've got. And without further ado, I'll turn the mic over to Tony to take us through the first part of the webinar.
All right, thank you, Gigi, and thanks to everyone who is in attendance, spending, as Gigi said, your lunch hour with us. Can we go to the next slide? As Gigi said, my name is Tony Dudzik, and I'm the Associate Director and Senior Policy Analyst at Frontier Group. Frontier Group is a nonprofit research and policy organization whose mission is to provide information and ideas to build a healthier, more sustainable America. You can find out much more about what we do on our website at www.frontiergroup.org or by following us on social media. Now, if you signed up for this webinar, you probably already understand on some level that our dependence on fossil fuels is a problem. But before we talk about how our own financial choices might contribute to that problem and be part of the solution, it's worthwhile to take a step back and remind ourselves of why this matters so much. Next slide. Now, before looking at the big picture, I think sometimes it's actually helpful to start small and to recognize the ways in which fossil fuel pollution is something that we experience in our own daily lives. So here's my story. I grew up outside of Pittsburgh in an area that had been extensively mined for coal. In fact, the place where I lived as a teenager was actually built atop an abandoned mine. I could look outside my bedroom window and look across the valley at piles of coal waste that were 60 feet high. And when I took a walk down the road alongside the stream near our house, that stream ran this otherworldly fluorescent shade of orange from the pollution from acid mine drainage. Now, by the time that I lived there, it had been 40 years since the last bit of coal had been dug out of that mine. But the environment was still paying the price. Now, you take that little story and you repeat it tens or hundreds of thousands of times over in different ways and in different contexts and places around the world, and you extend those impacts out for decades and generations to come, and you begin to get a sense of the profound damage that fossil fuel dependence has done and continues to do to our environment and our health. Next slide. The three things that I want you to take away from this part of the presentation today are, first of all, that fossil fuels are an inherently dirty and dangerous source of energy, that they create pollution at every step of their life cycle, and that a future with dramatically reduced fossil fuel consumption is possible and available to us today. Next slide. Now, nowadays, we talk a lot about the role of fossil fuels in causing climate change, and that is, of course, incredibly important. But it's really just the tip of the melting iceberg when it comes to the impacts of fossil fuels on our environment and our health. Those impacts begin with the pollution and disruption caused by mining and drilling. They continue through the refining and processing of those raw materials into usable fuels. They continue on to the transportation of those fuels across the country and around the world. And they conclude with the combustion of the fuel and the disposal of the waste products. Every step in that process, every step from cradle to grave, creates the opportunity for fossil fuels or the waste products associated with them to find their way into our environment. Next slide. Now, the most obvious problem, of course, is the contribution of fossil fuel burning to climate change. Burning fossil fuels accounts for about 3/4 of America's emissions of the greenhouse gases that are warming the planet. But that's, again, not even taking account of the full contribution of fossil fuels to climate change. Other aspects of the fossil fuel life cycle, including methane leakage from oil and gas systems, are also making a significant contribution to the warming of the planet. Next slide. Burning fossil fuels also creates air pollution that harms our health. Particulate matter and ozone pollution from fossil fuel combustion can trigger asthma attacks and raise the risk of premature death, while many compounds of fossil fuels are themselves toxic. Every year, it seems we learn more about the health impacts of fossil fuel air pollution, and every year the news gets worse. In fact, in 2018, there was a study that estimated that roughly 350,000 people die prematurely each year in the US due to exposure to particulate air pollution from fossil fuel burning. Next slide. Fossil fuels also jeopardize the health of our waterways. We extract dangerous fossil fuels, sometimes from halfway around the world, and then transport those fuels by ship and pipeline and truck and train to refineries, and then again to our local gas stations and power plants. And spills and leaks across that supply chain can be devastating, as all of us who remember the Deepwater Horizon spill in the Gulf of Mexico in 2010 can attest. But the threats aren't just limited to oil. The photo that I've included here depicts a river in Tennessee following the rupture of an impoundment containing toxic coal ash from a local power plant. Not only was the ecology of the river itself badly damaged, but many of the people who worked on cleaning up the spill fell ill afterwards. Next slide. Our nation's extensive fossil fuel infrastructure also consumes vast amounts of land, with roads, pipelines, and other fossil fuel extraction and transportation infrastructure fragmenting wildlife habitat across the country. Next slide. And in addition, fossil fuels, and especially oil and gas, are dangerous to transport and store. A few years ago at Frontier Group, we analyzed federal pipeline safety data and found that a significant gas pipeline incident occurs somewhere in the country on average of every 40 hours, with the worst of those incidents responsible for claiming lives. Next slide. There is, however, good news. We have the technology and the resources to eliminate much of our use of fossil fuels today. Every state in the US has the resources to generate as much renewable electricity as we currently use. And some states have many more times the potential to generate renewable electricity as they do consume, compared to the amount of electricity that they consume today. The rooftops of our homes, schools, churches, warehouses, and superstores have the potential to generate large amounts of electricity from the sunlight that strikes them every day. And instead of having to be transported across the country or around the world, that energy is available to us in our communities, right where we use it. Electric vehicles, batteries, and other technologies are making it possible to use clean electricity to power more of our lives. And millions of Americans have taken concrete steps to adopt clean energy technologies in their homes, and millions more would follow if we made it easy and affordable for them to do so. But let's not kid ourselves. The fossil fuel industry wants to be able to continue its business model indefinitely, despite the risks that it poses to the environment and our health. Fossil fuel companies are investing today in building out the infrastructure that will continue to supply their products long into the future. To make the transition to the cleaner future that we know is possible, we need to do everything we can, including educating ourselves, our neighbors, and our friends, and investing our time and hard-earned money in making that transition a reality. Next slide. If you'd like to learn more about the problems of fossil fuels and the clean energy solutions that can help us replace them, please check out our website at www.frontiergroup.org. Many of the statistics that I've cited here are available in reports on that website, and I can certainly help folks to find them. We have a lot of great resources there that can help. So thanks again for spending your time at the webinar, and thanks again to Green Century and Green America for the invitation to participate. Thanks.
Thanks, Tony. So again, that sets the stage for us all needing to do all that we can to reduce the pollution that comes from fossil fuels. We're focusing specifically in this webinar on how to green your finances as one way to make a difference. So I'll turn the mic over to Kathy, who will focus in on banks, credit cards, and insurance.
Great, thank you so much, Gigi. And again, my name is Kathy Becker. I'm the Responsible Finance Campaign Director at Green America. And Green America's mission is to harness the economic power, including the strength of consumers, investors, businesses, and the marketplace to create a more socially just and environmentally sustainable society. So next slide. So often we think of our power as an activist, or a voter, a consumer to make change in society, but we don't often think of our everyday finances as a way to make change. Things like our bank accounts, credit cards, insurance, and investing. But can your finances make a difference to communities, to corporations, and to the environment? Yes, they can, and we're going to talk about how. Next slide. So there's some differences in approach between the three areas I'm going to talk about, which are banking, credit cards, and insurance versus investing. Really, with banking, credit cards, insurance, in all of those cases, you have money that you put in someone else's hands, and then they can use the money however they see fit. And that might align with your values or it might not. And so your job in these cases is to find the right company to do business with. With investing, you do have more say in the type of investments you make. For example, if you have a retirement plan, you often have choices and you can pick which funds to invest in. So you're going to want to understand Leslie's presentation on how to invest fossil-free. But first, I'm going to talk about banking, credit cards, and insurance. So next slide. So first up is banking. And so just to give you a little background on how banks work, this is sort of a simplified graphic, but this is in essence how they work. So let's say you have a pot of money, let's say $5,000, you put it into a savings account. That bank can then use the money to lend to other people or other businesses, say home mortgages or small business. And then those people and businesses pay the bank back with interest, and the bank pays you interest for the ability to use your money. They just pay you a little less interest than what they get from their customers, and that's how a bank stays in business. Next slide. So the problem is when there's many different types of banks. And so on one hand, there's what we call mega banks. These are your household names, the biggest banks in the world and in the country, names like JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Citigroup, and Wells Fargo. And these are Wall Street banks that exist to work with large corporate Wall Street customers. Many of them are working internationally. There's lots and lots of rules. But unfortunately, these banks, according to the Banking on Climate Chaos report, the 65 largest, since the Paris Agreement, have financed over 7.9 trillion, and that's trillion with a T, to the fossil fuel industry since the Paris Agreement. And they have in fact increased the amount that they're financing fossil fuels in 2024 over the previous year. And 1/3 of that is from the 10 largest American banks in that 65. On the other hand, we have community banks, your local credit unions. And some of these are mission-driven banks. They have an actual mission of serving their community, particularly underserved people in the community. So things like small business loans and housing, social services, they might help finance local environmental works. And so I have a few examples here of these sorts of mission-driven banks. Banks like Beneficial State Bank, which is on the West Coast, Amalgamated Bank in New York, Self-Help Federal Credit Union, and online is Clean Energy Credit Union. Their whole mission is to help people install solar, buy an electric vehicle, get a heat pump, like do clean energy. Next slide. So in order to have a resource, if we're asking people to leave a mega bank that's financing fossil fuels and go to a better bank, well, we need a list of the better banks. And so Green America created our Get a Better Bank map. It's at getabetterbank.org. We list over 3,000 of these mission-driven banks and credit unions, 17,000 branch locations nationwide. So anyone, anywhere should be able to find at least a few somewhere near them. We have a list of 7 certifications and memberships that we want these banks to have, at least one of those. So for example, a community development financial institution, a minority depository institution, a B Corp bank, and so on. So you can find that at getabetterbank.org. Next slide. And we also on that website have advice, a kind of a guide on how to switch banks. It can be done. It's a little bit of a process, especially if you have automatic deposits and automatic withdrawals. You have to make sure and move those so that you're not, bouncing checks between your 2 accounts. But a lot of people have done this. We have their stories on getabetterbank.org as well. Okay, next slide. So now we're going to talk about credit cards. So there's some background information also to know about credit cards, and one is how they make money. So obviously they make money if they have an annual fee, if you have to pay yearly to have that credit card. Not all cards have this, and the ones that do have perks like travel benefits, things like that. there's interest. And so if you don't pay off your credit card bill each month, there's very high interest in the 20%, 22%. And so that adds quite a bit to your bill. And credit card debt in America is a really serious issue. And so the issuers of these cards are making a lot of money from that. And then even if you do pay off your credit card in full each month, there's still transaction fees, and those are invisible to the card user. The merchant pays those, and those are typically about 3.5% of every purchase. Some of that you might get back in a rewards program. A teeny sliver will go to like Visa or MasterCard, the network, but the rest of it will go to the issuing bank. Next slide. So this also gets into branding versus issuing. And sometimes those are the same, but often not. And so in this example, you can see the branding on the front. That's an Amazon card. It's basically a store card, but it's not issued by Amazon. Amazon, they're making money off your purchases, but they're not making money from the card itself. To find out who issues the card, look on the back, often towards the bottom. And in this case, it's JP Chase. So any purchases, the merchant fees are going to go to Chase, any interest fees are going to go to Chase. And so that's how you need to understand how to find the bank that's issuing the card, because that's who's getting the fees from your purchases. Next slide. So if you have one of the community development banks or credit unions that I talked about under banks, and they issue their own card, you can use that card knowing that money is going to that bank and will be used to build your local community. Unless there's one caveat on that, is some of these community banks and credit unions, they're not big enough to handle a credit card themselves, so they farm it out. And some of them farm it out to an entity called Elan Financial, E-L-A-N. Elan Financial is unfortunately a subsidiary of US Bank, which is one of the mega banks that is lending a lot of money to fossil fuels. So be sure and find out who at your bank issues that card. And if your bank or your community bank or credit union doesn't have its own card, or its card is issued by Elan Financial or some other entity like that, you may want to look elsewhere. Next slide. So we have on our Green America website a credit card guide for how to identify responsible credit cards. We have a few suggestions here on our website that you can see on the screen here as well, in terms of finding a responsible credit card. And we will be sending these resources out after the webinar, so you can follow up on this. Next slide. Okay, finally, it's property insurance, and even your home, your renters, your auto insurance also matters. So next slide. So insurance is really under a lot of pressure right now because of the climate crisis. It has greatly increased the number of major storms and natural disasters that have hit the United States and really the rest of the world. There were 27 such disasters costing over $1 billion last year. And that didn't even count the LA wildfires, which themselves are expected to cost $250 billion. And so in response, a number of the big name insurance companies are not renewing people's policy or restricting coverage. And most insurance companies are raising rates. LendingTree says that just in the last 6 years, insurance rates across the country have gone up an average of 40%. In some states, much more than that. So this is really, the climate crisis is directly affecting property insurance. Next slide. So incredibly, even though these large insurance companies are paying out damages because of the climate crisis, many of them also insure fossil fuel projects and invest in fossil fuel companies. So on the insuring side, just like you can't get a home mortgage unless you have home insurance, a fossil fuel company can't do a fossil fuel project like a frac pad or a pipeline or an LNG terminal if they can't show they have insurance, and plenty of it, because fossil fuel disasters are extremely, they're really bad and they're very expensive. So our allies have dug up who is insuring LNG terminals across the Gulf South, and you can see these household names there. Maybe you even have one of those insurances. I used to have Liberty Mutual. And then on the other side of the slide is investing. And so insurance companies, most people don't know, they take people's premiums, and yes, they use those to pay out claims, but they also invest those and they make money from those investments. And so some insurance companies are investing billions in the fossil fuel industry that's causing the climate crisis. So we saw that and decided we needed a solution. If we want people to move out of these insurance companies, then we need, where can they go instead? So next slide. So we created a climate smart insurance directory that's also on our website. And so we list insurance companies in every state. There's at least 3 or 4 in every state. Some states have a lot more. They needed to have both home and auto insurance so that people can bundle and save that way. We don't want them insuring in fossil fuel projects. That information is not always available, but where it is, we used it. And investing little to nothing in the fossil fuel industry. We also looked at AM Best for their financial ratings and looked at Weiss ratings for their non-payment rates. And so you can find that on our website. Really, again, most of the insurance companies in there are regional, local and regional mutual insurance companies that are not household names, that don't have big advertising budget, but they've served their community for decades. I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathy. And we will then, looks like you've got one more slide, actually.
Oh, I do have one more. Okay. This is just some shopping advice for how to shop for property insurance. This is also on our website in our insurance area. Call several independent agents in your area because they each work with different companies. That will give you a full accounting of what's in your community. And it's really important to get quotes from more than one company. That's it.
Okay, great. Now we will pivot to Leslie, who will round out our discussion today on how to green your investments.
Great, thanks, Gigi. And thank you to all of you who made time to join us today. We really appreciate it. So I'm the president of Green Century Funds, and my name is Leslie Samuel Rich. Green Century, for nearly 35 years, has been providing individuals a way to invest with their values. We are one of the first fossil fuel-free, green, responsible mutual fund families in the country. And we have a 3-part approach. The first is to help keep your money out of environmentally dangerous industries and companies. So that includes fossil fuels, but it also extends to tobacco, nuclear weapons, nuclear energy, and a few more. The second is to use our leverage as shareholders to press companies to improve their environmental policies. And so we're doing that to get companies to source more clean energy, to reduce their plastic packaging, or even to improve their right to repair so that you can have the access to the tools and information you need to repair your phones and computers and things like that. The third is our nonprofit ownership. We were founded by nonprofit environmental and public health groups, and we're still owned by them. And that's what makes us really different and unique in the mutual fund industry. It means that 100% of our net profits belong to those organizations who can use it to run their critical campaigns, whether it's protecting clean water or wild spaces or public lands. So why invest fossil fuel free? Well, the first, and probably what brings you here mostly, is because you want to align your investments with your values. And that makes sense. People take a lot of steps in their own lives to try to protect the environment, and there shouldn't be a wall between doing those things and investing. And it's also a way to feel just good about your choices in your investing. The second is to join others. And this, I think, is more important than ever right now, is to show fossil fuel industries that there is a strong voice that wants them to stop their role in driving climate change and that they should not be influencing our public policy. Already tens of thousands of individuals have joined, as well as big institutions like Harvard University and the Church of England. The third is actually about risk management. Staying away from fossil fuels can help you manage the risk in your investment. But usually the biggest hesitation is around performance. So on the next slide, you can see how an index with and without fossil fuels behaves. So this goes back quite a few years. The blue line indicates the index without fossil fuels, and the yellow line is the same index with fossil fuels. And well, so you can see what has happened over time. And I find this a very useful chart to share with family or even a financial advisor who are with you on everything, but are just a little hesitant about taking fossil fuels out of your investments. There are also financial reasons, other financial reasons to consider investing without fossil fuels. The first is something called stranded assets. And I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's when coal, oil, and gas corporations are valued partially on their reserves, which are fossil fuels that are still in the ground and are unburned. But if a company becomes unable to extract and sell those reserves, such as changing financial issues, government regulations, or lawsuits, these effectively become stranded and move from the positive side of their balance sheet to the negative side. And sometimes companies are also asked to or forced to prematurely write off those assets. And that can negatively affect a company's valuation and share price. When we started talking about this 10 years ago, we were predicting this was a long-term risk and scenario, 25, 30 years out for long-term investors. But already back in 2020, this started to happen. So that's when Shell wrote off $22 billion in stranded assets, and BP wrote off $17.5 billion in stranded assets. The next bucket is again around performance. The fossil fuel industry, as you can see, has performed worst 7 out of the last 10 years. And the last is volatility, which is what it sounds like. It's the ups and downs of a stock price. And in most cases, the higher the volatility, the riskier the stock. So, how to invest without fossil fuels? First is to find out what you own. Without intending to, you are probably invested in fossil fuels. And that's just because the vast majority of mutual funds and ETFs don't have this exclusion. But to find out, you can look up the holdings in your mutual fund or ETF. You can do that through the website of those firms. You can do it on Morningstar or other online sources, or you can use a tool. It's called fossilfreefunds.org, and that's in the materials, and we'll put that up too, that's listed. And if you have one, you can ask your financial advisor. If you're doing it yourself, you want to look at the sector. There are 13 sectors. One of them is called energy. If that sector is not a zero, it means you are investing in fossil fuels. The second is to decide what you want to exclude. For Green Century, there's no legal or standard definition of what means fossil fuel free, but for Green Century, this is the one we have been using. One, there's no exploration, extraction, processing, refining, or transmitting of coal, oil, and gas. We also don't invest in utilities that burn, for example, coal to make electricity. And finally, if there's any companies that are remaining that have those carbon reserves that we just talked about, we also eliminate them to exclude that risk for you in the future. And the third is to reinvest or make new investments. With Green Century, you can do it right on our website, through Schwab and Fidelity, or through your financial advisor. And you can choose any way that you start investing fossil fuel free. You can do a little bit or you can do a lot. It's really all up to you. So how to find these investments and what to look for. So when you find a fund or a mutual fund or an ETF that you want to invest in, you want to make sure that the exclusions are written into the prospectus. The prospectus is the legal document that's governing the investment strategy of the funds. And no matter what a marketing banner may say, or someone may tell you, if it's not in the prospectus, that fund is not required to follow that guideline. Again, you want to look for a zero in the energy sector. There are 13 sectors, and the traditional or dirty energy sectors are classified under energy. Renewable energy is not, surprisingly, in that sector. So you don't have to worry about eliminating that as a unintended consequence. And the third is make sure you go beyond the green sounding name. There's a lot of greenwashing that has happened out there. It's very misleading. So there's funds now that are called low carbon or climate conscious or even green. And firms have some leeway in both what they name their funds and how they define being fossil fuel free. So here's why you need to look under the hood and find out what it really holds. So Fidelity's Climate Action Fund sounds like a good thing. It includes fossil fuel companies. And then State Street's Fossil Fuel Reserves Free Fund is free of fossil fuel reserves or those stranded assets that we're worried about. But they do invest in 47 fossil fuel companies, including Duke Energy, which is a major coal producer. And then finally, if you've heard of the acronym ESG, that can mean so many things, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're screening out any particular industries. And so again, you have to look under the hood, read the prospectus, read the fund brief, or talk to someone at the firm and find out what is happening with that investment. The different ways to invest, in case you're brand new to investing, a common one is mutual funds. And that's when you pool your funds. You don't have to do it. You invest in a mutual fund. That company, like Green Century, invests in different stocks or bonds or a combination of stocks and bonds for you. The reason, or one of the reasons Green Century has mutual funds is so we can do that shareholder advocacy that we spoke about. That means that we can talk directly to the company, we can engage with them, and we really can achieve some different changes that we feel are important. In fact, last year, we got companies to change 11 of their policies, or 11 companies to change their policies. And in the last 5 years, we've got 93 companies to source more clean energy, reduce their plastics, stop deforesting by burning and bulldozing forests to grow agricultural products. And those are real impacts that you're making through your investments. A second, more recent addition to investment options are ETFs, electronically traded funds. And those invest in stocks. They're traded throughout the day. Because of their structure, they can't do the shareholder advocacy or engagement that I'm talking about. And finally, some people may just want to invest in individual stocks and bonds. And again, you can do that through your advisor or your platforms. But a lot of people have their money in retirement accounts. And for many people, you're saving through your 401k at your employer. And so one way is to ask your employer to add a fossil fuel free option. But that might take a little bit of time and a little bit of work. So in the meantime, there's one, you can look at rolling over your old 401k. A lot of time when people leave their jobs, they just leave that 401k back there. But you can roll it over and there may not be a taxable event. You need to ask your accountant or whoever does your taxes about that. But that is a way to actually start investing in a new way. You also can open an IRA, and there are two kinds, a regular or traditional IRA and a Roth IRA. And really the only difference is when you're taxed on that investment. With a traditional IRA, you're taxed when you withdraw those funds in retirement. And with a Roth IRA, instead, you're taxed at the beginning and not when you withdraw. And if you expect that you're going to be in a higher tax bracket as you age, you might want to consider a Roth IRA. And Green America and Green Century have resources to help you with your 401k plan or just setting up new IRAs. And in this year, just a helpful tip, you can invest up to $7,000 in your IRA or $8,000 if you're 50 or older. And so I just want to leave you with some, one or two closing thoughts, and is that you have the power to make choices with your investments, whether you do it on your own or with your financial advisor. They work for you. You should be able to tell them what you want to do. And hopefully the resources here are going to help you do that. And finally, you can start with a little bit or a lot to curb climate change. As you know, and as Tony described, the most important thing is to take the next step and get started. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. And thanks to all the panelists for the information shared today. As noted at the outset of the session, we are releasing an updated version of a jointly produced guide between Green America and Green Century, and that is the Sustainable Investing Guide, Investing Without Fossil Fuels. Go ahead and scan that code to get this hot off the presses guide. We will also drop a link to the guide right into the chat, so you can get to it in either way. As a preview of what you can expect to learn from the guide, the moral and financial case for divesting from fossil fuels, specific steps that you would take to align your investments with your environmental values and concerns, and then how to look for authentically green products and how to spot greenwashing. All right, so let's move on to the next slide. While we show you this required slide, I'll remind you to be on the lookout for the presentation deck that we reviewed today. It's got a lot of resources in it, and so we're making it available to all of you, and that will come to you by way of an email. So you can be on the lookout for that in the next couple of days. Okay, so then we're going to move to the questions and answers part of the slide. We've answered a lot of the questions in the chat, but there are some that just couldn't get to in the chat, so we'll do it here live. And the first one that I would like to pose to the group from Michael Kohler: is there a way through one's financial engagement to combat those things that further exacerbate climate change? For example, artificial intelligence and data centers. Thanks very much for that thoughtful question, Michael. I'd like to pose it to two people on the panel. Both Green Century and the Frontier Group are part of a larger network, the Public Interest Network, that works on a lot of issues. So I'm going to kick it to Tony first to talk about ways in which the Public Interest Network is addressing the issues of AI and data centers. And then I'd like to pivot over to Leslie to talk about this as an extension of shareholder advocacy. So let's start with Tony and then go to Leslie.
Okay. Thanks. It's a really good question. I actually want to pull back, if we can, just a little bit, because I think, this is such a new an emerging issue that I'm not sure that everybody on the webinar might be fully aware of sort of the scope and scale of what we're talking about. But we're currently in the midst of a massive build out of computing power to power artificial intelligence. The idea being that the bigger scale that we can employ in computing, the faster that we are going to be able to unlock what many people see as being the potential of AI. One of the downsides, and there are several of this, is that in order to power those computers, they take an incredible amount of energy. There are data centers that are currently being proposed that would use as much electricity as a decent-sized city just in one facility. The scale is truly massive. And what's happening already, and we did a report, which I can put in the chat, about data centers earlier this year, is one of the first things that we're seeing happen is that demand for electricity is causing old coal-fired and gas-fired power plants that were supposed to be retired as we've been transitioning to renewable energy and clean sources. Those power sources that were supposed to go offline are getting a new lease on life. And not only that, but many of the larger data centers are now proposing building their own fossil fuel infrastructure to power those power plants or to power those data centers. So there is a real worry and I think an immediate concern that this is not only going to set us back in our progress toward reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but is actually potentially going to turn us in the other direction. So in terms of what we can do and what our network is doing, some of the again, this is a relatively new area that a lot of people are trying to figure out. But among the solutions that have been proposed are things like ensuring that that data centers are as energy efficient as possible, ensuring that they are able to use electricity flexibly so that if there's a time when there's a lot of demand on the grid, maybe the data centers power down and use electricity at other times. And then, of course, to get those data centers to commit to using renewable energy. There's a bigger question, I think, for many of us as to whether this build out is actually a good idea in general, whether it is good for society. But those are places where I think we have a little fewer immediate handles. For our part in the network, one thing that we've been doing at Frontier Group, trying to raise awareness and understanding of what is actually happening, as well as some of the potential solutions that exist. So again, as I mentioned, we put out a report in January on this issue and are following up as time goes on. And then we've been working, other organizations within our network have been working with local community groups, because one of the things that is an issue with data centers is that while they have large scale implications for energy use, they also have really intense local impacts in the places where they're being built. Whether it's noise pollution, whether it is concerns about air pollution from ones that are powered directly by fossil fuels, or impacts on local water supplies. So in many places around the country that are seeing this influx of data center development, local community groups are actually raising questions about how that will affect their lives. So that's a little bit about the background of the issue and things that we're working on, and Leslie can talk a little bit about shareholder advocacy.
I would say that this is such an emerging issue that it's going to require our shareholder advocacy team to work even more with the companies, especially the tech companies, to set climate pollution reduction goals and to source more cleaner energy. The real threat is that they are turning to nuclear energy and taking nuclear energy contracts. And so our team, which we have 4 people working full-time with the companies in our funds, has been successful in getting other companies to do those things. They have got them to set science-based targets, which is just a fancy way of saying that they're setting climate reduction goals, and something called climate transition plans, which is not only setting goals to reduce that carbon, but also usually includes sourcing more renewable energy. And so particularly our advocate, Giovanna Eichner, is the person who is taking on that issue in the coming years. And that is one of the things that we care a lot about, is reducing the climate risk, both from the existing companies and their fossil fuel emissions, but also from this like incredibly big growing AI drain that's on us.
Great. We'll move to a question from Eleanor, directed to Leslie. Investing fossil fuel free is the first step. Next is to invest in renewable energy and energy efficient mutual funds. What funds do that next step?
That's a good question. I would suggest, we don't have one of those yet. There are ones that do that. I would search for clean and renewable energy, and they would be specifically sector funds. And I saw another question come in. It's like the renewable energy companies are not in any one sector. It's kind of confusing. They can be spread out among different sectors. So you can't just look at the prospectus or the sectors to find out how much renewable energy are. But there are funds that focus just on renewable or clean energy. A lot of them, you have to be just mindful that any one sector can be a little bit more volatile if you just focus on that.
I'll pose a next question to combination of Leslie and Kathy on the subject of Morningstar and Morningstar sustainability globe ratings. Are those, in your opinion, informative for these issues? So why don't we start with Leslie and then go to Kathy?
I think overall they're a helpful tool. You know, there's a lot of ways to measure sustainability, and Morningstar has theirs. It's not a perfect tool, but it's a good starting place. It does not, however, to my knowledge, specifically measure if anything is fossil fuel free.
Yeah, I would agree with Leslie that it's a good tool. You want to check more than one tool. So I would check Morningstar. I would also check, as you said, fossil-free funds, which does rate funds on whether they're fossil-free. And also natural investments has a rating called the Heart rating, which is for, you know, socially responsible, sustainable funds, and they rate those. So any combination of that, it's always good to check as many sources as you can.
I will pivot to a question basically to all three of you. This is coming from Diane. Thanks for your thoughtful question, Diane. How are you all actively counteracting the negativity coming from the Trump administration regarding climate change, i.e. his disbelief in climate change? So why don't we start with Tony, then Leslie, then Kathy.
Boy, I was hoping you weren't going to pick me first, Gigi. I think, you know, the thing about, let me try to put this in as good perspective as I can. One of the reasons that I started off my introduction the way that I did in talking about the really broad scale, like if we were only talking about climate change, if climate change was the only thing that was wrong with fossil fuels, we would have enough reason to get off of them tomorrow. However, there are many other impacts and implications of our fossil fuel use and many other promising benefits of clean energy that enable us, I think, to make continued progress, you know, in the years to come, even, you know, with the current administration trying to do everything it possibly can to stop us. So, you know, I know in our work and in our network, you know, we're continuing to talk about the benefits of clean energy for the environment, but also for climate change, but also for the environment, working on issues like solar power, particularly at the local level. You know, and then I think, you know, really, I think we need to continue, you know, part of where we have gotten to in the debate in our country is that we've sort of, you know, gotten ourselves into a place of pretty extreme polarization. So I think, you know, my challenge back, obviously, there's a lot that we can do to continue to highlight issues and concerns with climate change and the way that it's affecting people now and will affect people in the future. But I think we also, you know, each as individuals in our communities need to find opportunities to talk about it and to talk about it maybe with people who, you know, are not, you know, are not inclined to believe it, because ultimately, you know, I think the only way that we are going to do what we need to do on climate change is if we get broad societal consensus that it's important for us to do. So, you know, I think that's obviously for those of us who are on this webinar, something that we have a role in, but I would also suggest that, you know, all of you who came here have, you know, an important role to play as well in helping to have those conversations and build the consensus to build the kind of a cleaner future that we all want to see.
I would add that in this time, in addition to what Tony said, that we are going to be very limited at the federal level from what happens. But there is progress available at the state level. That's where our owners, the public interest research groups, do most of their work. And so on that score, there are promising things that have happened. And the way I personally think about it is, you know, we need to keep doing what we're doing in the ways that we can. And doing these small changes, whether it's with our credit cards or investments, adds up and makes a difference and does send a message. In the meantime, we do have to figure out how to talk to more people about the environment. Across the political spectrum, people just care about clean water, clean air, public lands. Ranchers and hunters care about wild spaces. And so while we might not agree with them on many, many issues, where we can find those issues where we do is to build those coalitions and work for environmental protections.
Kathy, you want to round us out? I'm having all of you respond to this question because I think it is an important thing to hear about how different organizations are positioning their work in these times. So Kathy, to you to round us out on answering this question.
Yeah, so a lot of the Green America resources that I talked about are aimed at individuals, and people just really do not think of their personal finances as a tool they can use in this fight, and it really is. So there's that. I would also lift up working on the local level with your city, your county, and just don't get discouraged because the majority of people do understand climate change is real. They are concerned about it, and they want to take action. And so we just work with that. We work with the people who want to do something about this. Just ignore the deniers, just move on because this issue is too big, too important to let that stop us or divert us.
Great, thank you. Somebody asked if there was a step-by-step tutorial for how to invest in these kinds of funds. I would say download the guide because that is a good place to get started. And then if you have questions beyond what's in the guide, you can always reach out to Green Century because we are a wealth of information on our own funds, but then also can just talk to you about the process more generally. To Leslie, we have time for just a couple more questions, and so I'll ask this one from John. Thank you for your thoughtful question, John. I asked my financial advisor about Green Century funds, and she said that they invest in Procter & Gamble, Coca-Cola, and others that I wouldn't consider ethical companies. Is it possible to invest without these types of companies?
Oh, I just wrote him an answer in the chat, but I'll say it here again. We don't think any company is perfect. And so, but we also realize if we have a very small holding, it can be more volatile and not also be as competitively in the performance area. And so our focus is on environment, taking out the most environmental industries and the worst environmental companies. For ones that are left, that is where our shareholder advocacy kicks in. And it's interesting you picked out P&G and Coke because those have been two of the companies that we have engaged with for many years, quite aggressively, with P&G, particularly on their use of timber coming out of the boreal forest in Canada, and with Coke on their plastic bottles and on their reusable program. So again, no company is perfect, and I'm not particularly excited about them, but we have made a lot of changes. And so that is also important because these are very big companies, and if no one is pressing them to make changes, they will not. They will simply not do this on their own. And so that's where our shareholder advocacy kicks in and, again, delivers a lot of results, especially compared to other mutual funds and investment firms out there.
Great. I'm going to read, not a question, but just a comment from Pam that maybe everybody saw in the chat, but it seems like it's worth pulling out. 89% of people globally are concerned about climate change and willing to pay 1% of their income to support, and they don't think they are in the majority, so they don't talk about it. We need to all be talking about this with everybody, neighbors, taxi drivers, whoever. Can't agree more. And again, we would all like to thank you very much for taking some time to spend with us. The path forward is dependent upon each of us doing all that we can in little and small, little and big ways, which hopefully we've given you a sense of the ways in which we're tackling that here. Again, the presentation deck will be sent out by email. I saw that somebody was looking for the QR code, but we'll make sure that everybody has every way possible to download or get to the various resources that we've talked about on the call today. So thank you very much and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. And we're going to try to answer the questions offline, the ones that we haven't been
The
able to
ones that
answer.
we didn't get to, that's absolutely.
Yeah, the ones we didn't get to. So stay tuned, and we'll be back in touch.